She cooked his favorite meals, bought new dresses, even practiced smiling in the mirror, just hoping he'd look at her the way he used to. But every night, he came home colder. Every morning, he left without a word. And slowly, the woman who once lit up his world started to disappear. Until one day, someone else noticed her silence. Someone who asked, "Are you okay?" and actually waited for the answer. What happens when the person who promised forever becomes a stranger, and the one you never expected becomes your only home? She loved her husband, but he didn't fight for her. Have you ever lived with someone every day and still felt completely alone? Ruby did, for years. She had married Robert, her closest friend since university, someone she once laughed with under library lamps, shared dreams with over cold pizza, and trusted with every part of her heart. Back then, love felt like breathing, simple, natural, essential. But that was years ago, before silence settled into the spaces between them, before her husband's eyes stopped lighting up when she entered the room. Now, Ruby wakes up to a man who barely looks at her. He leaves the house with a brief nod. No goodbye kiss, no soft hand lingering on her shoulder. Just keys, wallet, the door clicking shut. And it's been like that for months, maybe years, if she's honest. She keeps trying to count the last time they sat on the couch and laughed together, and comes up empty. It didn't used to be this way. At first, she told herself he was tired. Work was stressful. He just needed time. So she gave him space. She cooked his favorite meals, left handwritten notes on his mirror, dressed up for him on random Tuesday nights. But Robert never noticed. Or if he did, he never said a word. And slowly, her hope began to dry up. The house once filled with warmth and chatter, now echoed with absence. They lived together, but it felt more like two ghosts haunting the same space. Ruby tried to hold on. She really did. But when you're the only one trying, even love begins to feel like a burden. That's when James became her anchor. He was their neighbor, lived right next door. He and his wife had always been close with Ruby and Robert, almost like family. BBQs on Sundays, helping each other with yard work, emergency babysitting favors. They'd been through everything together. But lately, James had become something more to Ruby. Not in the way you're thinking. Not at first. It started small. She'd stop by to borrow sugar. He'd check in if he saw her sitting alone on the porch. When her car wouldn't start one morning, he was the first to show up with jumper cables and a cup of coffee. And when Robert started pulling away, James leaned in. He listened. He didn't fix. He didn't offer shallow advice. He just heard her, the kind of listening that feels like being held. At first, Ruby told herself it was nothing. A kind neighbor, a friend who cared. But there's a tenderness you crave when your heart is starving. And when you go too long without feeling seen, even a single glance can shatter your resolve. So she started visiting James more often. Just short chats at first. a few minutes to vent about her day, a smile, a safe place to sit when her own house felt cold. They never crossed any lines, at least not yet. But emotionally, she was already somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere welcome. Ruby still loved her husband. She swore she did. But when love becomes one-sided, it turns into something else. A memory, maybe. A habit. A ghost of something that used to be alive. And as the days passed, Ruby felt herself slipping bit by bit into the arms of someone who wasn't hers, but who felt like home. Ruby never meant for things to feel this way. She still remembered the day she walked down the aisle toward Robert, her heart pounding with joy, not fear. She had believed with every fiber of her being that they'd build a life full of laughter, family, and warmth. And for a time, they had. But memories only keep you warm for so long when the present feels like winter. So she tried, again and again. Ruby wasn't the type to give up easily, not on love, and especially not on someone she once considered her best friend. She bought new dresses, soft fabric, and soft colors, carefully chosen with him in mind. She wore perfume he used to say he loved, did her hair the way he liked. She even practiced smiling in the mirror, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd notice, that he'd see her again. But when Robert came home, he barely looked up from his phone. He didn't see the effort, didn't see her. And that kind of silence, when someone doesn't reject you, but doesn't embrace you either, it cuts deeper than cruelty. It makes you question everything. Was it your fault? Were you not enough? Had he stopped loving you, or just stopped trying? And every time her heart cracked just a little more, Ruby found herself walking next door. James never made her feel like a burden. In fact, when she knocked, he looked grateful to see her. He'd invite her in, like it was the highlight of his day. She'd sip tea at his kitchen table, surrounded by the smell of cinnamon and freshly watered plants. And for a few stolen moments, she felt like a person. Again, not a ghost, not an afterthought. They didn't talk about love, not yet, but they talked about everything else. About childhood, about music, about the way the sky looked before rain. And more than anything, Ruby talked about Robert, how distant he'd become, how much it hurt to feel invisible in your own home, how tired she was of pretending everything was okay. And James listened with a kind of attention that was rare, almost sacred. He never blamed Robert, never tried to push her into anything, but he also never hid the truth in his eyes. James loved her, not in a loud or selfish way, but in the quiet, aching way people do when they know they'll never be chosen. And still, Ruby couldn't stop going back. She kept it innocent. That was her rule. No matter how lost she felt, she wouldn't betray her vows. She couldn't cross that line. But one evening, James did something she didn't expect. He went to talk to Robert. He told him not in anger, not as a rival, but as a man who cared about Ruby, that she was hurting, that she was trying, that she needed anything from her husband before she lost all hope. But Robert didn't want to hear it. He brushed James off, cold and impatient, told him to mind his own business, sighed Ruby was just being dramatic. He never even asked if she was okay. And that broke something in James, because he had tried to do the right thing. He had hoped, even for his own heartbreak, that Robert would wake up before it was too late. But instead, he just watched Ruby fade. That night, Robert came home and didn't speak a word. And Ruby, she couldn't take it anymore. The loneliness, the rejection, the aching silence, it exploded into a storm. She stood in the kitchen, holding on to the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And when Robert walked past her like she was furniture, she snapped. Words flew, tears fell. She screamed until her voice cracked, begging him to just see her. And for once, he didn't ignore her. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said nothing. But in that nothing, there was a truth. He didn't care enough to fight. Not for her. Not for them. And when she left the house that night, sobbing and shaking, she didn't stop walking until she reached James's door. She knocked. He opened. And this time, neither of them pretended. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Not with this much pain in her chest. Not after trying so hard. For so long. But the moment Ruby stepped into James's house, something shifted. She wasn't just seeking comfort anymore. She was seeking refuge from a love that no longer wanted her. James didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The way she looked trembling, eyes swollen from crying, hands clenched as if holding in the last pieces of herself, he understood everything without a single word. He led her to the couch, gently, like she might break. And for a long time, they just sat there. No touching, no pressure, no lines crossed, just silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. But Ruby was tired of silence. She turned to James, voice low and raw. Why does it feel like I'm the only one still fighting? And James, with his heart bare and voice steady, answered, because you are. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't poetic. It was just honest. Ruby knew the truth. Some part of her had known it for a while. She had already lost Robert. She just hadn't wanted to admit it. Because admitting it meant accepting that all those years, all that love, had led to this. A marriage in ruins. A husband who had already let go, quietly, long before she even realized they were drifting apart. And James, he was still there. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, always. It would have been easy for him to just take her in his arms and act on everything they'd both been feeling. But instead, James did something Ruby never expected. He asked her, "What do you want, Ruby? Not what you think is right. Not what will make everyone else feel okay. Just, what do you need?" She didn't answer at first, because she didn't know. But she stayed. And in the quiet days that followed, James became more than a shoulder to cry on. He became her mirror, reflecting all the things she'd forgotten about herself. That she was kind. That she was still beautiful. That she mattered. That she deserved more than being tolerated. She deserved to be chosen. One evening, James did something bold. He met Robert again. He tried one last time to help patch what was left. Not because he thought Robert deserved Ruby, but because he believed she deserved closure. A real ending, not just this slow, painful decay. But Robert was still the same. Distant, detached. When James told him that Ruby had reached her breaking point, that she'd nearly collapsed under the weight of trying to save something alone, Robert simply said, she knew what she was getting into, and that was it. James left that meeting heartbroken, but not for himself, for Ruby, because now it was clear she had been holding on to a man who had already let her go. That night, something inside her broke open. She didn't go home. She stayed with James, and this time, she didn't just cry. She let herself feel everything she'd buried: anger, grief, shame, and guilt, but also desire, hope, freedom. For the first time in a long time, she felt wanted, not out of pity, not out of need, but out of love. It wasn't just an affair. It was a beginning born from an ending. And when they finally gave in to each other, it wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Ruby and James didn't need grand declarations. What they had now was quiet, steady, and real. For the first time in years, she felt seen, heard, safe. Their relationship wasn't built on impulse. It was built on months of emotional honesty, shared pain, and the gentlest kind of love. She wasn't escaping anymore. She was choosing. Robert, meanwhile, didn't change. He lived as he always had, distant, cold, disconnected. It wasn't until Ruby was truly gone that he began to notice the silence she left behind. But by then, it was too late. He hadn't fought for her when it mattered. There were no dramatic endings, just absence. A quiet goodbye that spoke louder than any argument ever could. Some judged her, others understood. But Ruby didn't look back. She was done surviving. With James, she was healing, becoming herself again. Because sometimes, the person who saves your heart isn't the one who promised to protect it. And love? Real love isn't about who stays the longest. It's about who sees you when you're breaking and chooses to stay anyway. Have you ever held on for too long only to realize it was time to let go? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated and hear our latest stories. Goodbye, and see you again.